Before we go on, let's make sure everything we've set up so far actually works. So we're just going to create a test case to let us load a sequence quickly and make sure that part is functioning. Open up your control object and let's create a new event. We'll click Add Event and choose Key Pressed Letters S. To be honest, you can choose any key you want here for this. And I'm going to create a description here. And I'm going to paste in a code block and then explain it. So it looks like there's a bit of stuff going on here, but I'll explain. We are going to be creating an instance on that layer that we specified with the cur seq layer variable. But in order to do that, we're just checking two things first. So as we talked about when we discussed cameras and viewports before, our game is actually looking at our room through a camera. And as the camera moves around, certain variables change, including sort of the position, the X and Y of where that camera is. That's called the view. You can see that here, camera get view X. So what this expression is doing is creating a temporary variable for the X and the Y, and then finding the position of the camera within our room, and then using a bit of math to make sure that the X is set in the middle of the camera. There are two functions here. There's camera get view X and camera get view width. Camera get view width is pretty self-explanatory. It's the width of our camera, which we set up in our room. That's 1920. View X is the X position of the camera in our room. So as we are moving around, the camera, which you can see by this white box, is also moving around to follow our player. So the X is essentially that top left corner right there. So we're just tracking that to make sure that we are targeting the center of our camera, both in the X and the Y position. Next, we're checking if a sequence exists on a particular layer. So this function says if layer sequence exists. It checks two things. It checks the layer on which the sequence should exist and the actual sequence asset itself. So cur seq layer was defined in room start. Remember, we checked to see if this layer exists and we set it. So it's checking whatever that gets stored as. It should be the layer that we created called cutscenes. And then just for this test, we are checking a very specific sequence. We're checking seq baker happy. So if it is not already loaded and existing on that particular sequence, and just to be sure, if that layer still exists, because sometimes we just want to be extra careful, then let's use layer sequence create to put that baker happy sequence that we created on this layer, and to do so at this X and Y position. So that's the X and Y position that we're just figuring out here, which will be the very center of our camera. Why are we doing this? Well, if you go to our sequence, the X and Y of our sequence is actually the middle, right? That's the origin point. So we want to make sure that the sequence is being aligned with the middle of our camera so that it just looks correct. It's right in the middle of our view. It's not off to the side or being cropped in a weird way. And we're doing one last thing here. We're using layer depth, which is a built-in function, to just make sure this layer is nice and close to the camera, just in case. So with that done, we can go ahead and run the game. And now if I press the S key, it should just pop up that happy baker sequence. There it is. So that's great. Now we haven't done anything else, and you'll also notice that the other sounds in the game didn't stop playing. You know, it just everything played together, which is okay. We'll fix that later. But at any point, if we just press the S key now, we can load that sequence and see that animation in the context of our game. So once you're done with that, you can close the game. And let's go back to GameMaker Studio 2.